Alrighty, so today we have Matt McClelland, our Activities Coordinator at NPA, who's going to be giving us the rundown on building the most detailed and up-to-date map. Now, just for a little bit of housekeeping, you guys, we are recording this, and the reason for that is so people who miss it can actually jump onto our website and watch the webinars that we've posted previously. And if you want to ask any questions, we have the chat and the Q&A open. So I'll be emceeing, so I'll be looking at the questions as they come up, and at the end we'll be asking Matt those questions. Alrighty, let's let Matt take it away from here.
Fantastic. Thank you, Shani. Thanks for that introduction. As Shani said, I'm Matt McClelland. I'm the Bushwalking Manager or Activities Coordinator for NPA New South Wales. In other parts of my world, I also run a few bushwalking websites, such as wildwalks and bushwalk.com, that might even pop up in today's conversation as well. I'd too like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which I'm on today, which is the Darug people. I'd like to pay my respects to the elders past and present. This is Aboriginal country, always has been and always will be. And especially when we're talking about maps, it's important that we remember that, not just because it is Aboriginal land, but because we're standing on their shoulders. Mapping is not a new phenomenon. It's something that's been around for tens of thousands of years. We might not have used maps that we recognise today, but mapping didn't just pop out of nowhere. It's been part of cultures for a very long time, and certainly part of the longest surviving culture in the world, that of the Australian Aboriginal people. So thank you. So I'm going to kick off today's talk by doing the screen sharing. I'm doing a few risky Zoom things today. So we'll got the slideshow going, and I'm also going to do a couple of demos as we go. Today's talk, I want to talk about, I've started halfway through the slide deck. I want to talk about mapping generally, but I'm also going to get into some specific practical stuff and do some real live work on maps. So it'll start off a little bit more nerdy, and it will get a little bit more practical, and then we can bounce around questions and stuff at the end. So the idea of this is to be helpful, thoughtful, and practical. So feel free to ask questions. Shani can interrupt me as we go. I won't be following the comments or questions as we go, but if there's something that pops up, she can interrupt me if it makes sense to answer that at the time. Otherwise, we'll get right into it at the end. So building the most detailed and up-to-date map ever. So what is a map? I think we need that as a starting point. And it sounds like a bit of a, I don't know, nerdy question to us, because it's obvious. A map is that piece of paper, or actually, no, it's that thing on your phone, or actually, it's quite complicated. So the normal definition of a map is it's a diagrammatic representation of an area. I think on Bushwalking 101, we talk about it as land or sea, but obviously you can have maps of the sky. You can also, you can map all sorts of different things, not just what we consider as maps as bushwalkers, and they can represent different things. But maps have been different during times. Sometimes, it's practically a map to say, hey, head that way, up that hill. That's a type of representation of an area. Aboriginal songlines are a type of map. They may not have been written down, but it was map memory. It was a way of sharing that information, that geography through generations. Australian Aboriginals had other ways of mapping as well. We've seen artistic paintings, we've seen sketches, we've seen the official government maps. I don't know why things that governments do get flagged as official, but they do. We get really highly accurate and detailed maps that are just completely lack soul and impossible to read. We get strip maps I remember as a kid when driving to Melbourne or to Tamworth, you would have this map, which was just this long line, and it would just have little things marked along it, like service stations after different distances. So it didn't really give a sense of the geography as such, but it did give you a good sense of what's in between and what you're going to do. And you could argue that track notes are a different type of map. So as we talk about this, I want to keep the idea of what is a map quite open, but we will be focusing more on stuff that's useful for bushwalkers. So traditionally as bushwalkers...
Matt, sorry, Matt, can I just jump in for a sec? There is a question at the start from a guy called Alan. Will you be explaining how users can contribute a new point of interest, a POI, to OSM?
Absolutely. I hope that's Alan from the Central Coast branch, because if it is, I'm actually going to be adding the very toilet I think you're talking about. So I saw on Facebook, Alan posted a photo of a new toilet, and I'm going to use that as a demo. I've actually borrowed your photo, Alan. I hope you don't mind. So assuming that's right, but yes, absolutely. We'll be doing that very soon.
Oh, it's Alan from Haymarket.
Oh, from Haymarket. Okay. So another Alan who's a member of the NPA has put up a photo of a new toilet in a national park. So I was going to add that as a map. So absolutely, we'll be doing a few examples of that. Great question. Okay, so traditionally we've used the sort of two types of maps when we think about bushwalkers over the last 100 years in Australia, and they are the Dumpy style sketch maps and the New South Wales government topo maps. Now, the Dumpy maps were built for bushwalkers. The New South Wales topo maps that we refer to as bushwalking maps were not built for bushwalkers, but they're quite useful for bushwalking. They convey a lot of information. But when we're building a map for bushwalkers, we get to, in this day and age, choose exactly what we want to have in there. So, we can label things like fresh water that used to appear, that would appear on the Dumpy maps, but not on the topo maps. So sometimes it's a bit hard to tell which water sources are reliable, which sources are actually fresh water as opposed to salty water. Toilets aren't always marked. The track details, we know if it's a management trail or if it's a walking track, but nothing in between. So maps could provide a lot more information there. Maps could show you where there are steps or where there's no steps or where there's ladders and all that sort of stuff. Maybe geology, flora and fauna. So part of this conversation is really about what is it that we want on our maps for bushwalkers, and how do we go about making that happen? Paper versus digital maps. This is the same conversation bushwalkers have around boots and Dunlop volleys, really. We are passionate about our types of maps and the pros and cons of them. Now, paper maps, obviously the batteries don't go flat on paper maps, and that paper maps certainly have their place. When I bushwalk these days, I always use a digital map, but I also always have a paper map buried inside my pack. I don't think I've pulled out a paper map on a track probably for 5 or 6 years, other than around a campsite when I'm just chatting with people, to actually use in real life, because I'm finding the digital maps just so much more user-friendly. But they are great for planning, but paper maps are difficult to use in high winds. They do rip and they do break down. They are out of date, and errors are very difficult to correct. Whereas digital maps live on your phone. So if your battery dies, or if you're in the snow where it dies really quickly, that can be a problem. The screen sizes are small, all these sort of issues that we know about with digital maps, but they're also have some great advantages that you can zoom in and you can zoom out. You can pan around a much larger area. They do work offline, as long as you remember to download the maps before you go. Most people on your walk carry a phone, so now everybody can have a detailed map in their pocket rather than just those who have purchased the paper map beforehand. So if a digital map does die on a trip, chances are there's somebody else in the group with one to keep going. So I still carry a paper map. We still need to know how to read a map. Just because it's digital doesn't mean you can just follow the little blue flashing light mindlessly. But they do have their advantages and disadvantages. But how is digital different, really, at the end of the day? Like, if we're just looking at it on a screen, then we're just treating a digital map exactly the same as a paper map, just behind a sheet of glass. The thing with digital mapping is it's all about the data. You collect good data, and then you can do some really cool things with it. So when it comes to mapping, you can build style is the word they use in GIS world. You can style them differently. So you can have them for, style them for bushwalking, style them for cycling, style them for driving cars, for truck drivers. Using the same data set, you just run it through a different style guide and you produce a map that's really specific for different user needs. You can add different layers to different maps. So obviously bushwalkers are probably going to want contour lines. They might want hill shading. We can do really funky things with digital maps like 3D visualizations. In fact, some people are 3D printing maps these days, so that you've got a physical map that looks like the actual landform. They're great in disaster recovery. So when a good example was in the Haiti earthquake some years ago now, but when a disaster happens, people can get out there and if the map doesn't exist for where all the streets are, that they can be built so that people can find their way around quickly. But you can also map needs, things that buildings that have been damaged, all that sort of stuff. You can also do things in terms of disability access. You can theme a map so it's easier for people with low vision, improve physical access. And you can create those linear maps, those strip maps that we're talking about. But you can also do things like routing, like we're so used to with Google Maps, start here, end here. How do you drive, get those directions? We can do the same thing with bushwalking if we want to do that. And you can also ask maps questions, and we'll do that later in this talk. We will ask the map a question like where are all the cafes in New South Wales National Parks is one of the questions I am going to answer. We'll also look at finding seats and steps and all sorts of other things. So they're quite fundamentally different, the difference between a digital map and the more traditional hand-drawn map. Okay, so today's talk, we're basing it around a community project called OpenStreetMap. It is the Wikipedia of mapping. It is an open source map, which means that when you add stuff to it, you're giving that data away under an open content license called an open data license. And you're giving that to the community. And as the community keeps adding more data, we keep sharing that data. So very similar to the Wikipedia model. And it's building this ridiculously large and ridiculously detailed map of the whole world. And it's all done by volunteers. And we'll be making some edits soon, and you'll be able to do lots of editing from here on in. Now, OpenStreetMaps is just the digital map platform we're talking about because I think it's quite profound in its nature. It's quite different from a lot of stuff that we've seen in the past. So, but there are other digital mapping platforms out there that are usually private. The copyright models are different. OpenStreetMap's used, you will have, I guarantee that you've used OpenStreetMap, whether you know it or not. So if you've used Bing, Mapbox, if you used Map My Run, if you used Wildwalks, if you used Bushwalk, if you used TripAdvisor, if you used Uber, Strava, in America, most of the government departments, they all use OpenStreetMap in some form or another. The maps might be styled differently to specific users' needs, but the underlying data is all from this one repository. Now, it has a very interesting data model for those nerds. The data is open, but the image created by that data can be copyrighted. So the image we see on the right-hand side here was generated using open data. The image is the copyright of that is held by the OpenStreetMap Foundation, but the data used to make that image is held under this open data license. And with an open data license, you can do lots of stuff with it if you're willing to get in there and have a play with it. And it's fundamentally different from, say, the data on Google Maps, for example, where it's a closed copyright system, which is fair enough. They've paid for it, they've built it, it's theirs, but we can't play with it. Whereas with OpenStreetMap, not only can we play with it, you're strongly encouraged to get out there and play with it. Now,
sorry, Matt, I'll jump in. Just a question on the street map. Does OSM have access to government vegetation data layers?
It's a very good question. So some government data is actually released under the same license and it can be imported. what I do with OpenStreetMap is grab the OpenStreetMap data and then lay on top of it these other data layers. So we could easily lay on top of it the New South Wales Veg layer. We could lay on top of that contour lines. We could lay on top of that the geology from GA Australia. So there is certainly vegetation layers on OSM. They are different from the government ones. If the government ones have a compatible license, you can actually just import it into OpenStreetMap so that people can then start editing from there. But the beauty of that open license model is that it allows you to layer this stuff in. So if you wanted to build a detailed map with vegetation layers, then that's certainly permissible under the licensing scheme. But you couldn't necessarily do that with a proprietary mapping platform. Yep. Okay,
we've got another question.
Oh, good.
And I don't fully understand these because of the acronyms. It's not my area.
So OSM, by the way, is OpenStreetMap.
Yeah, I got that one.
Oh, good.
Yeah, no, that's okay. Can we add KMLs? I don't know what that is. Ooh. To OSM.
Kind of. So KML is a key key markup layer. It's the data format used by Google Earth. You can trace KML files in OpenStreetMaps. Generally speaking, and you can do a similar thing with GPX files, which is the file that your GPS creates while you're walking. You can use those when drawing, and we'll talk a little bit about that. I won't go into a lot of detail about it. Generally, with OpenStreetMap, it's discouraged that you import data. Generally, you will draw data unless you, if you've got a particular data set that's worth importing, then it'll be a great thing to talk about at the end. But there's, again, it's more often encouraged to just draw it by hand for a bunch of reasons, which we'll talk about when we get to the actual drawing. Good questions.
One more question.
Go for it.
Is there an iPhone equivalent of Osman, so OSM, for Android phones? Like, is there an iPhone version of Osman?
It's a very good question. I don't know the answer to that one. I thought that Osman was actually on iOS. I will look into that and get back to you. There definitely are equivalent style apps in terms of the functionality. I'm not exactly sure of the depth of that. That's a good question. Maybe somebody else knows and can make a comment. Otherwise, if I get a moment, I'll do a bit of a search on that as well. So Google Maps, OpenStreetMap is all about community. It's one of the questions that comes up with, well, one of the things Wikipedia gets teased about is the idea that it's open, so therefore it must all be rubbish. But the interesting thing is that because it's open and because there's a really solid community around it, Wikipedia is surprisingly accurate. And if it's wrong, then you can get in there and change it. Unlike encyclopedias of the past that were just wrong and would always stay wrong. And so an open system certainly introduces a risk of errors coming in. But if you've got a good solid community around it, those errors are rare. And when they do happen, they get cleaned up very quickly. And the community has systems in place to help manage that. So people are encouraged to reference how they came around the knowledge of putting in a point. Anybody else, if you make a change, anybody else can edit it or delete your work, and they can undo your work. So if you go in there just to muck it up, they can just hit undo and clean it up. Everything's logged. That history is kept. So you can actually go back and say, what did OpenStreetMap look like a year ago? You can chat with other members. So if you make a comment, like I'll confess, a few years ago when I was getting started, I made a mistake and I just deleted a little point that wasn't relevant on the map, but it actually ended up making a massive change to the shape of a national park unintentionally. And I didn't notice it at the time. I saved it and uploaded it. And a few minutes later, I got an email from a very friendly person on the community saying, hey, just noticed you're doing one of your first edits, this error happened, I've cleaned it up. Next time, if you notice this, then blah. And it was really nice. It was a really friendly interaction, and it was great to see people, checking what you're doing. And so don't be afraid of getting in there and having a go. There's a wiki, a sort of a book, an online book that has lots of information on there. So as you get really into it, it already has a lot of the answers. And there's already a whole bunch of accepted standards on how to map stuff. And so they're good to learn. The mapping systems help you do that easily. But if it doesn't do what you need, you can create your own. You can put in your own data and your own data models in there. But it's great if you can work with the community to create a standard that's going to be useful for everybody. It is surprisingly simple. We're going to get into the practicals very soon, but you just need to know 4 key concepts. A node is a point, single dot on a map. It has a latitude and a longitude, and it's just a single spot. And so you'd use that for marking a toilet, for example. A way is a list of nodes, an ordered list of nodes. So if you go from node 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, you draw a line between those points, and that's exactly how you draw a road. So you'll just go dot, 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 and that series of nodes get joined together to create a way. And then there's this idea of a relation, which is basically a list of ways. And that's how you create things like a local government area. So you will have drawn a boundary, you will have drawn a creek, you will have drawn all these other things that actually form that LGA boundary. And so you just join them all together and say, that's Hornsby LGA. And so there's just nodes, ways, relations, points, lines, and groups of lines. And then there's this tags idea. So the metadata, each nodes, ways, and relations can have, should have at least one tag associated with it, but can have an infinite number of them. And the tags are simply a key. So in this case, amenity, and what the value is. It's a toilet. And then with that data, you can do all sorts of stuff with it. You can draw maps, you can ask questions of the map. So key concepts. If that doesn't make sense, it hopefully will once I go and show you a practical example. But here's an example of metadata for a campsite just near Mount Wondabyne on the Great North Walk. So this is what it looks like in the editor that we're going to use today. And on the left-hand side of the keys, on the right-hand side of the values. So we're saying it's a backcountry. So it's a tourism campsite is the main key, that you can have tents there, that the person found this information by survey, by actually physically being there. There's no shower at this campsite. The name is Mount Wondabyne Campsite, no caravans, and it's a backcountry campsite. Now you could keep adding to that. You could add a URL you could add the owner, the manager of it, and you can keep adding all this little data. So you can see that on the map they've used the tourism campsite to add the icon for the map. But that other data could be expressed in other ways. So people might want to search the map for all backcountry campsites, or for all campsites that have tents but no caravans. So these are the sort of questions you can see. You can start asking once that data's in there. Now, before we get into the practicals, hang on. Isn't this a bad idea? For a long time in Australia, we have tried to protect natural places by keeping them secret. We don't talk about some of these wilderness walks in particularly, untracked areas. And the way that we've kept those safe is by pretending they don't exist. Don't tell people they're out there, only tell people who we trust. But that game's changed. A lot of this information's out there because of tools like OpenStreetMap, but also because of blogs and people on social media posting about these walks, and people going out there and doing walks that they would never have heard about pre the internet. So one of the questions I have, and I don't have the answer for it, so this is far from an NPA policy statement. It's just putting out an idea that there are risks in us pretending that this stuff is secret, because it's not secret anymore. But what we can do on OpenStreetMap is, if somebody puts up a track that shouldn't be on there because it goes into the Wollemi Pines, for example, then we can remove it, and we can then speak to that person in the community and say, actually, this is a really bad idea for these reasons. And you can have that conversation. And more often than not, people will be very receptive to that. And so you can keep track of those sort of things and negotiate to keep some things secret. But you're not going to be able to keep everything secret. So how do we deal with that? Well, I don't know the answer to that, but I think we should be starting to think about, instead of pretending this stuff's secret, that the people who actually care about these places should actually be the ones who publish good information and education and guidance for people, warning them about the risks of going out there, doing good stuff on Leave No Trace and other ways of caring for country as they head out there. So I'm just putting that out there because I know that's going to be a concern for some people in the background and some in the very foreground. And if it wasn't a concern, maybe it should be. Maybe it's something that we do need to think about and deal with as we go. Okay, let's have a play. You can see that I did these slides rather quickly. That's not how you spell campsite, but that's how I spelled it this time. Okay, so let's, can you guys still see my screen, Shana? Can you give me a thumbs up if that's all still sharing fine? Great. Okay, so let's, this is OpenStreetMap. We'll have a bit of a tour. When you come into OpenStreetMap, there's different layers. So these are different themes that we're talking about. You can go through and have a look at them. Now, contour lines are deliberately not part of OpenStreetMap. They come through in a different data set. But you can see how people have rendered the maps differently. You know, some people just interested in transport want to know where the train lines are. And that sort of stuff. Cyclists are obviously interested in cycling tracks and hills. And so they all highlight things differently. And so these are just some map styles, and we'll talk about how to style our own maps fairly shortly. But I was going to show you how to make an edit. So you just simply click on edit. I'm already logged in, and it opens up this really fancy, quite useful online editing tool. Actually, let me come out of here. I'll just go find the actual campsite that we're going to play with. Mount Wondabyne. There's Mount Wondabyne. Here it is. Okay, so I saw on Facebook the other day, and I've been waiting. So I've been chatting with Crown Lands about this for a little while. They're putting in a whole bunch of toilets along the Great North Walk. And I knew this one was going in soon. And then somebody on the Central Coast branch posted a photo after doing their own private walk in the area. So I was excited to see it. And so it's time to add it to the map. Now, normally I would do this after I've walked it, but I'm simply going to click on edit, zoom into the area, click on edit. I've just made some changes whilst I'm talking because it's habit, but I'll talk through those. Add a point. It's really quite simple. The toilet is located here, I believe, and you just simply then type in toilets. And then it pops open a bunch of options. So I know that it's a pit toilet. I know that it is publicly available. I know that it is unisex. And I don't know the answers to these other ones. I'll be pretty sure that there's no hand washing, pretty sure there's probably no diaper changing tables. But I don't know about wheelchair accessibility from the photo. It's give or take. So I'm not going to answer those questions, but somebody else will. Somebody else will come in and fix that up at some stage. So you can see I've got a point, which is called a node. And I've added these 4 tags. Amenity is toilet. Disposal is it's a pit latrine. Access, yep, it's open for everybody. So it could be a toilet. It's private, you know, toilet. People might want to map toilets in public public buildings or private buildings. So that might be a no, and it's a unisex toilet. So that's simply 1 point on a map. Now, I've also been here recently and remember that there's a seat here. It's a bench seat. It's got a wooden top on it, and it's got no backrest. So, oops, backrest is, sorry, I should have just clicked that, but anyway, there's no. So we've now got a seat. It doesn't have a backrest, so I'll put that in. If you don't know, that's okay, you don't need to add it. And that it's made of wood. Again, useful for some people, probably not for everybody, but we'll put it in there. Now, what else can you do? I'm just going to use this as an example. We've got here a rock platform. So somebody was asking about a vegetation layer. This is one way that we can do vegetation layers. But in this case, it's bare rock. And you know, if that rock has a name, we could put it in there. But some maps will render this as a grey or a white area. Now, I don't have a track example here, so I'm going to draw a track. I'm going to delete it afterwards, but just to show you how you do it. So there's a water runoff area here. So let's pretend that's a track. You see that the first time I clicked on line at the top here, and then I clicked on a node, so it's actually joined. Joining the lines is important. It doesn't matter for drawing a map, but it does matter when we're doing some routing that we'll show you later. And then I can just follow through, pretending that this is a walking track. And then when I finish, I can just double click. And now I've got a series of nodes joined together in a series, but there's no metadata on that. But in this case, it's a path. It's added it in there, and I can say by default, these are the values for a path, but let's just confirm that it's a foot yes, and that say no horses, no bicycles, assuming that there's actually rules around this. And you can put those things in. Now, there's lots of different types of highways. So any road type linear feature is called a highway. So whether that's a highway steps, highway residential, highway footway is just a footpath, tertiary road unclassified, or tracks and trails for different areas. So now, if you're unsure of any of these, just on the right-hand side, click on Info. It takes a few seconds and it opens up a little thing which tells you about what is a highway path, and it's a generic multi-use path for non-motorized traffic. And if you click on full documentation, it takes you to that wiki page where you can go, oh, you know what, maybe it's not a path, maybe it's a footway, and you can set it to exactly what you want it to be. Now, in this case, I'm just going to click on that and hit delete to get rid of that one.
Question, Matt?
Yes.
Yep. Alan wanted to know, do you need to do this on a PC, any editing, or can you do it on your phone?
You can do it on your phone. There is an app, which is what that previous question was about OSM. The apps are by far a better way of doing it than trying to do it directly through the web page on your phone. And the app also works offline. So you download the data and you can make those changes while you're on track. The way I prefer to map, the way I do this is I go out and I just take lots of photos. And then when I get back and I'm at the comfy of my PC, I just look through those photos. All my photos are geolocated. And so I can go, oh yeah, okay, there's a toilet. And you remember it the next day quite happily, and you can put in toilets and steps and that sort of stuff. If I'm going out to do a detailed survey, then I carry a voice recorder. I've got a GPS, see if I can find it. Okay, but I've got a GPS that's also a voice recorder. So I just record notes and just say top of steps, bottom of steps, and then on the map, I can see the top and bottom. Listen to those recordings and put those in, or give descriptions of stuff. But that's usually if I'm doing a very detailed survey, usually just a photo's plenty. And while you're in here, you might notice that, look, somebody else has drawn this line and it's good, it's very good, but we can actually just improve that slightly. Let's just bring that right onto onto the track, and you can see here. So the round dots are the actual existing nodes, but if you want to create a new node between two, all you have to do is grab that triangle and drag it across. It's really easy. And if you've walked an area, this stuff, it's amazing how much you remember, how detailed you can get. And this just shows you, for years, there was an issue on the New South Wales topo map where the Great North Walk was on the wrong side of a river. And it took me, I don't know, 3 years of writing letters and sending in photos and all this sort of stuff to get them to put it on the correct side of the river, because that's a big error on a map. And after years of, anyway, the map was corrected. Whether that had anything to do with what I did, I have no idea. But with OpenStreetMap, we can just go in there and make those changes, and that stuff's live instantly. So I'm going to save this. Brief description, adding a new toilet, other facilities to campsite. So this is just helpful for other people who might be editing the map to go, oh, what was Matt thinking when he was doing that? And they can go, oh, okay, put some context around it. That comment's probably not the most helpful one. But let's go back out into the normal map now, map view now, and have a look. Catches up. Where are we? Underline. There we go. And don't you hate it when you do live demonstrations and they don't work? Oh man, normally that is available straight away. Sometimes their rendering systems are a bit slow. Anyway, it's in there. I'll click edit again and to show you that it's in there. Normally, small edits like that will become available immediately on the mapping layer. There you go. So they are in there, and they will become available usually immediately, if not in a matter of minutes. So maybe some homework is that you have a look at OpenStreetMap in an hour and see if those changes have come through. So
another question from Mandy. Do you receive an automated email or something like an SMS or something when data you have entered is changed or deleted?
So you can tag your data to get those sort of notifications, and you can also tag areas. So you can say, look, I'm really interested in this area. Let me know when changes happen, and you can get messages coming through. And you tend to get to know people on it. So there's a few people who look. I'll look at their changes and go, oh yeah, good on him. Yeah, I know what I know what Andrew's been up to this week, and some of those edits, and I'll occasionally get messages from people just saying, oh Matt, I'm not sure about this, can you remember, is this seat on the left or the right hand side, that sort of stuff. So some people take it really seriously, and you can also leave comments. So if you're not sure of the location of the toilet, but it's within 50 meters of this spot, you can drop it in and just add a map note saying, look, I know the toilet's here, I'm not sure of the exact location, can somebody drop it in exactly the right spot? And then when somebody else is in there making edits, they'll go, oh yeah, map fix, I'll fix that, I know that one. And it makes their job a lot easier as well. I was going to just cruise around the map to show you, let me try one of the different layers and see if they render it differently. No one's doing a quick render. Okay. But I've already shown you the different layers and that sort of stuff there anyway. So let's do something more practical. So I was going to show you how to create a GPX file. So you're about to go and do a walk and you want to put it on your GPS. You can do it here. Man, I've been talking a lot, sorry. I will speed things up a bit. So this is a website.
We've got about 15 minutes left, cool. Maddie. Yeah.
I'll speed this next bit up, sorry. Grasshopper /maps, jump into here. So this is all based on OpenStreetMap data. And if we come into, I've evidently got a thing for Wonderbine. So I'm going to go into hiking routing mode. And I'm going to right click, set a start point. Hiking mode. Oh, come on. Never do demonstrations live. Come on. You can do it, computer. These things never work, do they, when you're doing a demo? Let's try that again. So the beauty of this is you don't have to draw the whole line. You just draw the start and the end point, and then you can add intermediate points along the way if you want to take a route that's different from what it's suggesting. I can't get this into hiking mode. So evidently the gremlins are at play. So let me just go into driving mode and show you it's exactly the same idea. And then I'll set an endpoint to here. Now it goes into hiking mode. Typical. So this stuff is generally much more stable than this. So I'm going to drag the pin down here. There we go. So we've now got a routing from here to, let's go just following a section of the Great North Walk up to Mooney Mooney. There you go. There's your line. There's your terrain profile on the bottom right. And these are your basic turn directions with distances and estimated walking times, which are a bit dodgy. But if you want a GPX file, all you have to do is click on this and then export GPX. And that is a file you can drop straight onto your GPS file, and then you'll have that line to follow throughout. So pretty handy tool. Again, based on OpenStreetMap. If there's an issue with it, go in, correct OpenStreetMap. Graph is usually updated the next day. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this next feature, but people, just because I've talked too much as it is, this is a product called mapbox.com. There's a free tier to it. So if you just want to go in, sign up for a free account and have a play, it's pretty handy. I don't use it personally a lot, but I know a lot of companies do. So, you know, your Ubers and your Map My Run, this is the product that they use in the back end. So this is a map rendering tool. So if you want to do things like, oh, I don't know, change the national park color for some stupid reason, you want it bright pink, then you can do that. And you can make your national park areas pink, and then there's other vegetation layers on there so that we can change those colors, and you can change the colors of roads to green. You can change the label colors to whatever you want them to be, and then that's one way of styling the map to your needs. You can also show and hide different types of facilities, so you can show toilets or hide toilets. And then if you want to print that, there's a print button, gives you a preview, and then you can click on a button and export, and then you can download that as an image file. Mapbox Studio is the go for that. Now, the last one, which I promised I'd show in today's talk, was the ability to find, I think I said all the cafes in New South Wales National Parks, and I must admit I wrote that before I knew how to do it, so I had to spend a bit of time this week working out how to do it. And this is a product called Overpass Turbo. It is a database effectively of OpenStreetMap, and it allows you to write queries. Now that might look complicated to some, to a lot, but you can learn this stuff, and there's a wizard that helps you out. But if I click on run for that, it basically takes that as a language, and I'm just saying, look, find all the areas where the operator key is equal to New South Wales National Park Service. There's lots of other ways I could have done that. That's just an easy way. And then take that as a search area. Now within those areas, find me any node which has amenity tag, cafe, pub, restaurant, and any way, because you might draw the outline of the cafe. And there you go. So it's returned all the cafes, restaurants or pubs that are within a national park boundary. So you can imagine how that's specific query might not be specifically useful, but you could do exactly the same thing. Oh, hang on, let's see. Let's do toilets out of curiosity. We'll run that, and we'll head up to Wonderbine and see if our toilets are appearing yet. Usually there's about a 1 minute lag between. So here's all the toilets in national parks. Let's go up to prison water. No, there's obviously something going on a bit slow at OpenStreetMap today. Normally these things come through in about a minute, but that's overpass. So that allows you to ask all these kind of questions that you can't traditionally ask as of maps. And so I use it for finding all the hiking tracks in a particular national park and that sort of stuff. So pretty handy stuff. Now I'm conscious of time and I want to get to all the questions. So let me just run through a few more slides and then we will.
There actually isn't any more questions. We've just been, doing them as we go. So we may get some more now.
Well, start flinging in those questions. Let me show you some examples. I feel a bit self-conscious about this because it feels like self-promotion, but it's what I wanted to show is how I use OpenStreetMap. So we've got website bushwalk.com, and in that I'm using OpenStreetMaps to do to help draw some stuff. So one is these terrain profiles. So although the elevation data is not on OpenStreetMap, I've got that in a secondary system. I draw these, what I see as strip maps. So the left-hand side's the start of the walk, the right-hand side's the end of the walk. And at a fairly quick glance, you can see where the hills are, what type of tracks you're on, whether it's a walking track, black dotted line, whether it's a service trail, which is the white dashed line. And you can see all these different facilities and things along the way, so that there's restaurants and there's taps and there's steps that you're going up and down, you're walking through a gate, there's a toilet, there's seats, and all these things that are just being ripped straight out of OpenStreetMap and drawn on this. And then above that, whenever there's an intersection, I just render off a section of map, rotate it to the user's direction of travel, and put an arrow on it, so that you've got the strip map which shows you, all the core features that you're going to do find along the walk. On the left-hand side is an example of some track notes that are written based on OpenStreetMap data. That there's at the start of the walk, it's going to tell you there's a water tap 15 meters before you start, and then after 15 meters, you head down 4 stone steps. And I know that because there's a tag called steps. Somebody's taken the effort to write in that there's 4 of them, and they've mentioned that the surface material is stone. So you can extract all this information in meaningful ways. And the bottom left is an example of using OpenStreetMap data. This is something I just started last week as the NPA plans to reopen the activities program. We're trying to work out how we do that in a COVID-safe way and let people know where, what area you need to live in. And this is some experiments I've been doing. This is not what the final thing is going to look like. But I'm able to look at a walk and ask OpenStreetMap, what LGA is this walk in? If it's in one LGA, then tell me what the LGA is. And then we can just do some maths around that and draw your 5 kilometre radius of travel. We can subtract that from the LGA. We actually get that LGA boundary back from OpenStreetMap. And so we can do all this sort of querying relatively easily. And that sort of stuff would just be impossible if hundreds of thousands of people hadn't put in all this volunteer time to build this awesome map that we have free access to in terms of data. So I encourage you to get in there and have a go, have a play with it. Don't be scared of it. I haven't given you a detailed tuition, but I hopefully given you a sense of why it's important, how it's helpful. And if you get in there and have a go, I'm sure you won't regret it. Just start by adding points. If you know of a toilet or a seat, put it in. And then once you start to feel a bit more confident, start playing with some of the tracks. Before long, you'll be hooked. And now's an awesome time to start building up the detail of OpenStreetMap in your local area as you're doing your local COVID walks. So here's some links that you may have missed, but if you want to add data, go to osm.org, openstreetmap.org. If you want to create maps, That map box is the product that I showed you. If you're really nerdy, then mapserver.org is an awesome product. That's what I use for running wildwalks and bushwalk.com maps. But you need your own server. You need to be a bit of a nerd. If you want to create routes and GPX files, Graphhopper. If you want to extract data, Mapbox actually does have some really good data analysis tools built in. Overpass-turbo.eu was that product that I used to ask those questions of OpenStreetMap. And it can return data either visually on the map, or it can return it in a data format that's useful for you to do more stuff with. And if you really want to get into it, there's a really cool product called QGIS, which is a geographical information service tool. It's open source, so it's free, and it's built by volunteers, and you can do really detailed manipulation of stuff in there of OpenStreetMap data. Shani, have we got any questions coming in?
Yeah, there is a couple now. Okay, someone said it looks like there is some data that you have to pay for, and then that was from Ian, and Alan said it's about $5 for the whole world. Is that?
No. So OpenStreetMap data is 100% free. Some people do sell data sets that you can purchase that may have been played with. Sometimes people just sell stuff that's free because they can. But Geofabric, if you want to download the world file, which is that that file, if you go to Geofabric, something like that, there you go, geofabric.de, German, I believe. And you can download maps and data, downloads, and these guys update their data, I think, daily. And here we go, download.geofabric.de. And here you can just download Australia and Oceania. And then there's all the files. So if you just want to download a section like just Australia, you can do that. And they come in, the standard format is called a .pbf. You need some software to be able to read it. But yeah, so you can definitely download OSM data, no charge. Yep.
Cool. There's a question from Gary. Hi, Matt. There is an old railway dam in Royal I've been trying to visit. There is a 1979 aerial image on Shire maps, which I can see there is an old access track, but no luck so far finding the start on the ground. Is the best option to transfer this system, onto this system and use the phone's GPS?
Yeah. So one way of doing this mapping, if I had more time, I would have shown you, sorry, but when you go and do a walk, if you have your phone GPS switched on, it's collecting all this data, and you can then upload that GPX file to that editor. You just drag and drop it in, and you get that line showing on the map. And so it's a really easy way to then go in and go, oh, well, this is where the dam was. I walked along the dam wall or along the base of the dam wall. So you can then just draw that dam in. And when you draw a dam, you can draw the water area that it creates, and you tag that as a water area, and then you tag a section of that way as the dam wall itself. And then you can put in all that stats. You can put in year built, whatever the year was, and what it's built of, concrete. And again, it's a fantastic way of just taking all that stuff that we have in our brains and sharing it with the rest of the world, because it's amazing how people will use this stuff.
All righty, another question. What do you do if you find an illegal mountain bike trail on the map?
Yeah.
Do we get into a deletion war, or do we leave them alone, or do we report them somehow?
It's a really interesting question, and this is, I guess, what I was alluding to. What do we do with this stuff? I don't have a clean answer for that. I think if it's illegal, I would probably write to the person who put it in there and just say, hey, look, these tracks are illegal under the National Park Act. I would like to remove them from the map and start that conversation, because that avoids the war. If they say, no, grumpy, then we can have, once COVID's over, ask them out for a cup of coffee and have the conversation, or meet there and show them the damage that it's doing. And that's the beauty of that community. Otherwise, other things you could do is change the name and put a brackets at the end of it saying illegal. Certainly report it to national parks, so if they're not already aware of it, they will be. But yeah, think about how you would react if you met somebody on the street saying, there's this mountain biking track in Royal National Park, go and check it out. How would you deal with that? You'd probably deal with it by having a conversation with them. And so that's how I tend to start those sort of things. Yeah.
Cool. So Bill has asked, it looks like a lot of time and effort, I guess, to edit the maps. As a walks leader, why would I bother?
Yeah, fair question, Bill. First of all, I'd say it's actually not a huge amount of time and effort. It is a lot of the stuff's already in there. I think one of the benefits is that as people come together, like if I share my maps, and I do everything I walk, I always update OpenStreetMap. But I'm sharing my stuff with other people who are sharing their stuff. So I get the benefit of all the work other people have done as well. So I put in my, however many hours, but that is augmented by the hundreds and thousands of hours that everybody else is doing. And so instead of me ending up with just my little bit of detail, I end up with this awesome map. And the other beauty of sharing it is that other people will then help maintain it. It's not just my problem once I create that. It's other people will keep on improving that well beyond my time on this earth. It'll keep getting used. And so I think there's those benefits. If you're it depends, I guess, on your motivation for bushwalking. If the idea of helping encourage other people to get out there and explore these places is part of that, then I think you'll find a lot of joy in it. If your motivation for bushwalking is, is just about you getting out there solitary, that's great. I'm not knocking that at all. Then you probably won't find joy in it and don't bother. Yeah. But it's amazing once you get involved with it, when you see the potential for it. And it's really cool when you're using a map, somebody else's map, and you see a line drawn and went, hey, I drew that. And when you look at OSM in a few hours and go back and see a toilet, go, I know how that got there. It's cool.
Yeah, cool. All righty, another question from Alan. Are the slides of this talk downloadable from NPA? Now, we do record the webinars and we put them on our website.
Yeah, I can share the slide deck. I'll send the slide deck after this to Sam. If Sam hasn't sent out the email today, hopefully she can include it in today's bushwalking bulletin email. So we might do it that way. Yep.
I can do that. I haven't sent the bulletin yet.
Oh, hey Sam.
Perfect. Hello.
Cool. I'll send you a link, and so that'll be in there, and then you can click on all these links. Yep.
Just kidding. Okay, another question. Could you elaborate more on how to add elevation info into OSM, or how to view if there's any existing elevation info on OSM?
Yeah, so elevation is one of those things that's not really tackled by OSM well. OSM deals with elevation above and below the ground of things. So you can draw a building and you can say this building is 5 meters tall, and then you can actually draw multiple floors on top of each other. So you can actually map an entire building and have the floor plan for each floor as it goes up, and you're just putting it on different elevations. So it handles that stuff really well, but it's not designed at all for topography, the shape of the land. So all that topography, all those contour lines, all that sort of stuff comes from other data, and most of it, if you're after that, is from a project called SRTM, the Space Shuttle Radio something. I've forgotten. SRTM. Let me have a quick look. But there's a bunch of really good shuttle radar topography mission from the Jet Propulsion Lab. It was done a long time ago, and that's given us a pretty good detailed elevation for the whole Earth, I think at about 10-meter interval, and a reasonably good accuracy. So that's what most of the contour lines that you see on the maps are generated from. The other really good source of elevation data is, I think it's called Elvis, GA, elevation Australia. There we go. No, that's all one. Digital elevation. So if you go to ga.gov.au, they've got a really good frame system where people can upload really high detailed, really high resolution elevation data. This is data that's captured by LiDAR, and some of it's like 10-centimeter accuracy. So every 10 centimeters along the ground, you have an elevation data point. So if you want to get into elevation stuff, that's tends to be the way to go. There are some attempts at open sourcing elevation data, but they start and stop often. It's just a really hard thing to community source. But there are projects out there trying to do it. But a lot of this data is available in a very permissive and open license.
I think there's just one more question that I can see. There's a comment about we should do a webinar on like mountain bike tracks as an issue in and of itself, and we fully take that on board. And that is a major issue that we want to tackle. We are trying to tackle. Yeah, so the final question, there are lots of comments to you, Matt, that it was absolutely excellent.
Oh, thanks.
But just going with the very last question from Alan, I'm not clear on why I would use something like mapbox.com rather than just OSM.
Oh, okay. So I wouldn't. Well, sorry, most people wouldn't. So Mapbox is if you want to build a blog or your own website or your own maps and you just want to style them. If you're writing a bushwalking book, and you want to style the maps in a particular way, then that's where Mapbox is really great. So when you use, Map My Run, for example, all they've done is gone into Mapbox and said, these are the color schemes I want to use. And then they drop that map into their website. So it was just an example of one service that's using the data and allowing you to render it. I kind of wanted to give this idea of separating out data from how we use it, and I guess Mapbox was an example of that. Yeah. Hope that is that helpful.
I'm not sure.
Hopefully.
A lot of that just goes over my head. I must admit, I have a friend who does some mapping underwater.
Yes.
Yeah, so he scuba dives and he has a scooter that propels him along. But because, satellite data does not travel through water, he has to have a GPS floating on the surface. Yeah. And he goes around. Yeah, it's amazing, the mapping and the detail and the level he's done.
Yeah.
Yes, and anyway, that's a really good segue into next week. So catch us for the webinars next week. Our webinar next week, we'll have Dr. John Turnbull, who will be doing a presentation on our marine environment. Yeah, and probably talking about his PhD, I would say. Yeah.
Fantastic. He's a great speaker. I'm looking forward to that one.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks all. See ya.